Welcome to Momentum Mind, the place where ideas meet action and your mind finds the momentum to grow. Here, we dive deep into the world's most powerful self-help and mindset books, breaking them down into stories you can see, feel, and live. Today, we're about to unlock the secrets of breath by James Nestor, and by the end, you'll see your thinking and your life in a whole new way. Let's jump in. Chapter 1. The forgotten breath. The rain had been falling for hours, soft and steady, like the world itself was sighing. James sat by the window of his small apartment, a half-empty mug of tea growing cold beside him. The city outside was breathing, cars exhaling smoke, people hurrying past in damp coats, the sound of their footsteps like faint heartbeats on the wet pavement. He inhaled deeply, but the breath came short, shallow. It wasn't sickness. It was something else, a quiet sense of being incomplete. The kind that settled in the ribs and refused to leave. James had always been curious about the hidden mechanisms of the human body. He'd written about deep-sea divers who could hold their breath for minutes at a time, about monks who slowed their hearts until they almost disappeared. But the more he read, the more one truth haunted him: for all our progress, humans had somehow forgotten how to breathe. He found old texts describing breathing as a sacred art, a force that connected the body to the mind to the world. And yet, in modern cities, people breathed like machines, fast, anxious, careless. Maybe, he thought, that's why we're all so tired. That night, he met Anders in a quiet cafe tucked behind an old church. Anders was tall, with pale eyes that seemed to see through walls. He spoke softly, each word deliberate. He had spent years studying the breath, not in books, but in his own lungs. You don't realize it, Anders said, stirring his tea slowly, but most people are half alive. Their breath never reaches the depths of their bodies. It stops here. He tapped his chest. They survive, but they don't thrive. James leaned forward. You're saying we've evolved backwards? Anders smiled. Not backwards. Just away. We've forgotten the way back to ourselves. Later, in the dim light of the cafe, Anders told him about an experiment, a strange one. For days, he and another researcher had blocked their noses completely, forcing themselves to breathe only through their mouths. Within a few days, their sleep worsened. Their heart rates rose. Their bodies became restless and confused. When we stopped, Anders said, and returned to breathing through the nose, everything changed. Calm returned. It was like flipping a switch. James couldn't stop thinking about it. He thought about how babies breathed naturally through their noses, how ancient statues always showed calm faces with closed mouths. Maybe this was the secret, not something new to discover, but something old to remember. The next morning, he stood before the mirror, his reflection tired, eyes shadowed. He closed his mouth and inhaled slowly through his nose. The air felt different, cooler, smoother, like water sliding into a deep well. He tried again. Then again. His chest expanded in ways it hadn't in years. A strange warmth spread through his arms. It felt like something inside him was waking up. He began reading more, old yogic texts, forgotten medical studies, even ancient Chinese writings that spoke of the life force hidden in breath. The patterns were always the same: breath was power, and those who controlled it could control their bodies, their minds, even their fears. Weeks later, James packed a small bag. He didn't quite know where he was going yet, only that he needed to see it for himself, the truth hidden beneath centuries of noise. He traveled first to the mountains, to a small monastery carved into the rock. The air there was thin, sharp with pine and cold stone. The monks greeted him with quiet smiles. They spoke little, but when they did, their voices carried a calm that seemed impossible. At dawn, James followed them into the courtyard. The sky was pale gold. The monks sat in stillness, their breaths deep and slow, like the world itself had slowed to match them. He joined them. At first, his lungs resisted. The cold bit at his throat. But then, something shifted, his breath found rhythm. Inhale, exhale. Silence. He felt his heart slow. The world grew softer. Hours passed. When he opened his eyes, the sun had risen high above the peaks. The head monk looked at him and smiled faintly. Breath, he said in a low voice, is the bridge between what you can control and what you cannot. That night, James wrote in his journal until his hand cramped. He wrote about the calm he felt, about the strange electricity that hummed through his body. He thought of Anders, of the cafe, of the millions of people who had forgotten this simple, ancient rhythm. As he fell asleep, he felt something stir inside him, a faint pulse, like a door unlocking. But in that stillness, another thought crept in. If breathing could heal, could it also harm? He remembered Anders' story, how quickly the body fell apart when the nose was closed. How fragile balance really was. Somewhere deep inside, he felt both wonder and fear. The breath, he realized, was not gentle. It was powerful. And like all powerful things, it demanded respect outside. The wind moved through the mountains, whispering through the trees like an ancient voice calling him deeper. Tomorrow, he would follow it. Chapter 2, The Cave of Lost Breaths. The path to the cave wound through thick forests where the air smelled of moss and wet stone. Sunlight barely touched the ground, and the trees stood like silent sentinels, their roots twisting into the soil as though holding secrets below. James walked slowly, his lungs aware of every inhale, every exhale, savoring the cool, crisp air that filled his chest more fully than it ever had in the city. He had heard of the cave from a local herbalist in a mountain village. She had spoken in hushed tones, warning him that it was not merely a hole in the rock, but a place where the air itself remembered. Ancient peoples had gone there to heal, to learn, to unlock the rhythms of their bodies. Breath, she said, was trapped inside the cave like a memory waiting to be awakened. James approached the entrance. It yawned like the mouth of some sleeping giant, black and silent. The wind whistled through it, carrying a chill that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He shivered, but not from cold, from anticipation. A lantern in hand, he stepped inside. The walls glistened with moisture, and the floor was slick with ancient minerals. Every sound, his footstep, the drip of water, even his own breathing, echoed as if the cave were listening. At first, it was disorienting. Each breath seemed to scatter, lost among the shadows. But as he walked further, a strange rhythm emerged. The air was dense, almost tangible. It pressed against his lungs, urging him to slow, to deepen, to listen. Hours passed. He explored narrow tunnels and wide chambers, some so low he had to crawl, others so high the ceiling vanished into darkness. And everywhere, he felt it, the subtle hum of breath that was not his own. He imagined countless people had passed through here over centuries, their lungs filling and emptying, leaving traces in the air like echoes of life. In one chamber, he found a shallow pool of water. Its surface was perfectly still, reflecting the dim lantern light like black glass. James knelt and dipped his fingers into it. The water was icy, but alive with energy. He leaned close and inhaled, a deep, slow nasal breath, and for a moment, he imagined the breaths of the past rising up from the pool to mingle with his own. Then he heard a sound, faint at first, like a whisper carried on a draft. It grew stronger, a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. He froze, listening. The whispers became voices, soft and melodic, speaking in a language he did not know, but somehow understood. They spoke of patience, of stillness, of the power locked in every inhale and exhale. James realized the cave was teaching him. Not consciously, not through books or words, but through its very air. Every breath he took here mattered. Every shallow inhalation was wasted, every deep exhale returned something he hadn't yet known he was missing. A night fell outside the cave, though inside it seemed timeless. He lay on the damp stone, feeling the cold seep into his bones, but his chest felt warm and alive. For the first time in years, he experienced the sensation of full presence, each inhale filling him like liquid fire, each exhale releasing the weight of 1,000 unnoticed tensions. But then, as he drifted towards sleep, a faint vibration ran through the ground beneath him. It was subtle, but enough to startle him. The air in the cave shifted, swirling in strange currents. And somewhere, deeper within the dark tunnels, he thought he heard a breath that was not human, long, deliberate, and impossible to mimic. James sat up, lantern shaking in his hands. The shadows seemed to pulse, stretching and twisting as if alive. The rhythmic sound continued, rising and falling, filling the cave with a strange, almost hypnotic cadence. He realized, with a mixture of fear and fascination, that he had stumbled into a part of the cave no visitor had touched in centuries. A place where the air itself remembered things long forgotten. Some instinct told him not to go further. Another voice, curiosity, that old, relentless spark, whispered that he had to. He took a deep nasal breath, feeling it descend deep into his lungs, anchoring him. Then he stepped forward, into the darkness where the breath waited, silent but expectant, like the shadow of a secret about to reveal itself. And as he crossed the threshold into the unknown tunnel, he felt a chill against the back of his neck, and a whisper that seemed to come from the cave itself. Do you truly know how to breathe? Chapter 3, The breath that remembers. The tunnel seemed to stretch forever, dark and unyielding, yet alive with subtle movement. James's lantern cast a trembling circle of light on the walls, revealing jagged rock and damp mineral deposits, but it was the air itself that commanded his attention. It was heavier here, dense with something he could almost taste, a faint metallic tang, like iron and memory. He paused, pressing a hand to the cool stone. Every inhale seemed to pull more than oxygen into his lungs. It was as if the cave were filling him with centuries of silent breaths, each one folded into the next like pages in a book. He realized he could feel the rhythm of countless lives, a deep, unbroken current of inhalation and exhalation that had been preserved here in the stillness. As he moved further, he noticed shapes in the shadows. Not people, but impressions, faint outlines carved by moisture and time that resembled the forms of those who had sat here long ago, learning the art of the breath. The cave had a memory, and it was waking. James stopped in a wider chamber. The floor sloped gently downward, and a faint mist hung low. He knelt and ran his fingers through it. The mist seemed alive, swirling around him in response to each inhale and exhale. He realized then that his own breath was no longer his own, it had become a dialogue with the cave itself. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply through his nose, feeling the cool air fill every corner of his lungs. Then, slowly, deliberately, he exhaled. The mist moved with him, curling around his arms, then rising, stretching toward the ceiling. It was as if the cave remembered his ancestors' breaths, and was teaching him to remember his own. Hours passed without a clock, without sun or moon. James sat cross-legged, breathing with intent, discovering muscles he hadn't known existed. He noticed how the air entering through his nose cooled and filtered, how it traveled down to the lowest chambers of his lungs, awakening places that had long been dormant. Each exhale seemed to release tension he hadn't realized he carried: stress, doubt, fear. The cave hummed in response, a quiet vibration that resonated in his chest and spine. Then he heard it, a voice, or perhaps a sound shaped like a voice, but not human. It flowed around him like wind in a hollow pipe, rhythmic and precise, rising and falling like the tides. It was not a sound he could speak or imitate, it was a sound meant to be felt in the chest, in the lungs, in the very marrow of the bones. James followed it, moving deeper into the mist. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint light, veins of minerals glowing softly as if the cave itself were breathing along with him. And then he saw it, a narrow fissure in the rock, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through, yet beyond it was a chamber that seemed impossibly large, the ceiling lost in darkness, the air vibrating with a quiet energy that made his hair stand on end. Inside the chamber, the mist thickened, and he realized it was more than moisture. It was breath itself, old, ancient, and alive. Each inhale brought sensations he could barely describe: clarity, warmth, the faint taste of salt and stone, and something deeper, a memory of life itself. He tried to step forward, but his foot caught on a stone. He fell, and as he hit the ground, the mist swirled violently, responding to his body's sudden movement. The strange voice rose into a low crescendo, a rhythm that seemed to echo the very act of being alive. James's chest rose and fell, his breath matching the pulse of the cave. And in that moment, he felt something he had never felt before, a recognition, a memory of breath he had never consciously known. It was as if the air itself was whispering, "This is how you were meant to live. This is how life flows." But then the temperature dropped sharply, and the light from his lantern flickered. He realized he was not alone. Somewhere in the shadows, something moved, subtle, deliberate, and unnervingly precise. He could feel it in the air, a presence that matched his rhythm perfectly, as if it had been waiting for him, breathing alongside him all this time. James's heart began to race. He took a deep nasal inhale, trying to anchor himself in the rhythm he had learned from the cave. The presence remained, circling, invisible yet undeniably there. A whisper floated through the chamber, audible and yet not, a question more than words: "Do you understand what you are holding in your lungs?" James froze, the weight of the question pressing down as if the cave itself demanded an answer. His breaths came slowly now, each one deliberate, each one deeper than before. But even as he centered himself, a creeping doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. If breath could heal, could it also control? If the cave had preserved the essence of life for centuries, what else might it hold, and what might it demand in return? He took another inhale, feeling the pulse of the chamber align with his own heartbeat, and stepped further into the darkness, toward the source of the presence. And somewhere deep within the mist, he sensed a figure, not quite solid, not quite imagined, waiting for him to make the next move. Chapter 4, The Guardian of the Air. The chamber seemed endless, shadows folding over themselves, mist curling in slow, deliberate spirals around James's legs. His lantern flickered, sending fractured beams across the walls, revealing nothing but stone and fog, yet he could feel it. Something watched him. Not just from the corners of the chamber, but from the very air itself. Then he saw movement. At first, it was subtle, a ripple in the mist, like a pulse. Then it solidified into a shape, tall and slender, its outline shimmering as if composed of the air itself. The figure breathed, and the chamber responded. The mist thickened, swirled, and settled again in perfect rhythm with the slow rise and fall of its chest. James froze, unsure if he should speak, move, or even breathe. The being regarded him silently, and in that silence, he felt the weight of centuries. This was no ordinary presence. This was a guardian, a sentinel of the forgotten art he had come searching for. "I've been waiting," the figure said, voice soft but vibrating through the chamber like wind through stone. "You seek the breath, but you do not yet understand it." James swallowed hard. I want to learn. I want to know how to live fully, to feel what's been lost. The guardian tilted its head, as if studying him. Breath is not a tool. It is a force. It can heal. It can destroy. Most take it for granted, and yet it holds the power of life itself. You must decide if you are ready to wield it, or if it will wield you. James's chest rose and fell with an involuntary inhale. The air in the chamber felt alive, pressing against him, guiding him, warning him. He realized that every shallow breath he had taken in the past was meaningless here. Every nervous gulp of air in the city had been wasted. The guardian stepped closer, and the mist parted around it like water. Its eyes, if they could be called that, glimmered like liquid silver. James felt them pierce through him, reaching not just into his mind, but into his lungs, his heart, his very bones. You must learn to listen, the guardian said. To understand the language of the air. There is a memory here that most will never hear. It speaks in the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation, in the pauses, the spaces, the fullness of life itself. James knelt instinctively, the weight of the cave pressing down. He closed his eyes and focused, inhaling slowly through his nose, letting the cold air fill the deepest chambers of his lungs. He felt it, the pulse of the chamber, the history of the breaths that had passed here, intertwining with his own. The guardian watched in silence, then reached out a hand. A tendril of mist wove into his chest, not touching, but sliding along the surface of his lungs. A shiver ran through him. Memories he didn't know he had surfaced, the warmth of a mother's embrace, the exhilaration of a sudden run, the calm of sleep beneath the stars. All were bound to breath. All were alive in the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. You are learning quickly, the guardian murmured. But there is more. Breath carries not only life, it carries energy. Pain, fear, love, anger, all are stored within it. And if you cannot control it, it can consume you. James's heart raced. He had felt the rush of calm in the monastery, the power of inhaling fully and exhaling completely, but this was something else. The cave, the guardian, the mist, it was teaching him not just to breathe, but to wield the air, to feel the life force that had been buried beneath shallow, careless breathing. The guardian stepped back, letting the mist rise and fall like waves. Tomorrow, it said, voice like wind through chimes, you will confront the breath that knows. It is not kind, nor cruel, it is indifferent. Only those who are ready can survive it. James nodded, though fear gnawed at him. He understood that the journey he had begun was no longer just about wellness or curiosity. It was about mastery. And mastery demanded more than knowledge, it demanded courage, discipline, and a willingness to face the unknown. That night, he lay on the cold stone floor, listening to the faint rhythm of the chamber. Every inhale and exhale felt amplified, magnified, like he was connected to something vast, ancient, and untamed. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of swirling mist, voices in the air, and shapes that breathed along with him. When he awoke, the guardian was waiting, as if it had never left. Its presence filled the chamber, silent, patient, unyielding. James knew that today, he would face the first true test, not a test of knowledge, but of presence. Could he breathe fully, completely, and survive the breath that knows? The chamber seemed to tighten around him as he followed the guardian into the inner sanctum. Mist thickened, pressing against his skin. He could feel the air vibrating, alive, anticipating his next move. Every muscle in his body was alert, every nerve stretched to the limit, every inhale deliberate. And then, at the heart of the chamber, he saw it, a swirling column of air, light, and sound, spinning like a living storm. It pulsed in rhythm with the cave, with the guardian, and with him. The breath that knows. James stepped closer, his lungs opening fully for the first time in years. He inhaled slowly, deliberately, letting the air fill every corner of his chest. The column responded, spinning faster, brighter, humming with life and power. And as he exhaled, the cave seemed to hold its breath with him. The guardian's voice echoed in the chamber, remember, the breath does not bend to you. You must bend to it. Fail, and it will consume what you carry inside. A shiver ran down James's spine. The mist swirled violently, the chamber vibrating with unseen energy, and the breath that knows waited, silent, infinite, and indifferent. Chapter 5, The Breath That Knows. The inner chamber was alive. Mist coiled around James like serpents, carrying the taste of wet stone and the faintest hint of something ancient, metallic, and electric. The swirling column of air at the center pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, or perhaps the lungs of the world itself. The breath that knows. James felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from recognition. He knew instantly that this was no ordinary force. It was a presence that measured him, weighed his intentions, and read the depths of his lungs as if they were open books. Each shallow inhalation was a lie, each careless exhale a betrayal. The guardian stood silently beside him, its outline blurred in the mist. "Do not fight it," it said. "Do not resist. Breathe with it. Become one with it, or it will unmake you." James steadied himself. He closed his eyes, inhaling slowly through his nose, letting the cold, dense air fill the deepest recesses of his lungs. The column of breath responded instantly, spinning faster, the mist twisting into spirals of silver light. The energy was intoxicating and terrifying. He exhaled carefully, releasing every ounce of tension, every trace of doubt. The column pulsed in response, a subtle rhythm that seemed to whisper secrets in a language older than words. Then it shifted. The force of the breath that knows pressed against him, testing him. His lungs felt as though they were being squeezed, stretched, reshaped from the inside. Memory surged, moments of fear, moments of loss, moments when he had failed to breathe fully in his life. The column absorbed them, reflecting them back as a storm of sensation. James gritted his teeth. He inhaled again, deeper, slower, feeling the air settle into the very base of his spine. The column pulsed violently, a roaring wind that threatened to knock him off his feet. He clutched at the stone floor, letting the mist lick his skin, and exhaled with deliberate force, pouring everything he had into the release. The chamber seemed to shift around him. Shadows stretched and writhed, mist spiraled into intricate patterns, and for a moment he felt as if the cave itself had turned inside out. The breath that knows was alive, and it was testing him. It wanted something, and he could not tell if it sought obedience or surrender. Time lost meaning. Each breath was a battle, each exhale a surrender, each inhale a claim. His chest burned, his lungs ached, yet he persisted. He could feel the force moving through him, reshaping the rhythm of his heart, the flow of his blood, the very vibration of his bones. And then, a voice, not the guardian's, but the cave's, the breath itself, whispered, "You are shallow. You hold back. I will show you what it is to be empty." James's body stiffened as a violent rush of air slammed into him. It was like the weight of 1,000 storms pressed into his chest, forcing the breath from his lungs. Pain and panic rose, threatening to overwhelm him. His instincts screamed to flee, to run, to gasp. But something deeper held him, anchored him in place. He focused. Inhale. Full. Exhale. Controlled. He let the breath move through him like water, flowing around the storm instead of against it. Slowly, the pain eased. The air calmed. The column spun more smoothly now, and he could feel the rhythm of it, the pulse of it, synchronizing with his own heartbeat. Minutes, or hours, passed. James could no longer tell. He existed only in the movement of air, the depth of inhalation, the release of exhalation. He felt clarity, a sense of presence so complete it was almost unbearable. And then he realized he was no longer just experiencing the cave. He was part of it. The guardian's voice cut through the haze, "You have survived. For now. But the breath that knows does not forgive carelessness. Remember this lesson: every inhale is creation, every exhale is transformation. And if you falter, even for a moment," James's chest rose and fell, filled with the cave's ancient rhythm. He had tasted the power, the terror, and the beauty of breath as it was meant to be experienced. But he also knew something unsettling: mastery was not final. The breath that knows would not stop testing him, and every new day would demand more than he thought he could give. As he stepped away from the spinning column, the mist settled, leaving the chamber quiet and still. Yet a faint vibration remained in the air, a pulse beneath his skin that whispered of challenges yet to come. He glanced at the guardian, who was already fading into the shadows, leaving him alone with the echo of his own breath. James knelt and placed a hand over his chest, feeling the slow, steady rhythm. The cave had shown him a glimpse of something profound, something that had been hidden from most humans for centuries. But the price of knowledge, he realized, was vigilance. To forget even for a moment could undo everything outside. The wind whispered through the fissure in the rock, carrying the sound of distant mountains, rushing water, and something else, something he could not yet name. A pull deeper into the cave, deeper into the mysteries of breath, and somewhere, beneath the shadows of the swirling mist, he thought he heard the faintest sound of another presence awakening. Chapter 6. The lungs of the world. James emerged from the cave into the cold light of dawn, his lungs still humming with the rhythm of the breath that knows. Outside, the mountains were quiet, wrapped in mist, but even in that silence, he could feel a pulse, soft at first, then growing, as if the world itself inhaled and exhaled along with him. He took a deep nasal breath, letting the mountain air fill every corner of his lungs. The sensation was electric, alive. He realized that the lessons of the cave were not confined to stone and mist, they were woven into the very air that moved through forests, over rivers, and into the hearts of cities. Breath was not just personal. It was global, ancient, and interconnected. In the village below, James spoke with a local elder, a woman whose face was lined like a map of rivers. She had lived all her life near the mountains and spoke with a quiet authority that made James lean closer, eager to hear. Air carries memory, she said, gesturing to the forests and peaks around them. It carries history. Every breath taken in this valley, every sigh of the wind, is part of us. The world remembers, even if people forget. James thought about the cave, the breath that knows, and the guardian. They had taught him discipline, focus, the danger and power of inhalation and exhalation. But here, in the open world, he began to sense another dimension. Breath was also a force connecting all living things. Each inhale drew from something larger, each exhale returned to it. He traveled next to the coast, where cliffs plunged into the churning sea. Waves crashed against jagged rocks, sending salt and spray into the air. James closed his eyes and inhaled. The scent of brine filled his nose, deep and raw. He felt the rhythm of the waves synchronize with his heartbeat, the wind guiding his breath like a teacher. In the city, he noticed something different. People were shallow, hurried, unaware. Their breaths were fragmented, clipped by anxiety and distraction. James realized how disconnected humanity had become from the simplest, most essential act of life. The cave had shown him what was possible. The world around him revealed how much had been lost. Determined to understand the full scope of this lost knowledge, James sought out doctors, scientists, and historians who had noticed subtle but profound truths about breathing. He learned about ancient practices, Tibetan monks holding air in frozen monasteries, Polynesian divers swimming for minutes without surfacing, indigenous shamans using breath to enter trance and heal the body. Everywhere he went, the pattern was the same: breath was sacred, powerful, and universally misunderstood. One night, he sat by a quiet river, watching its dark surface shimmer with reflected stars. The water moved with a rhythm endless and patient, and he felt the same in his own chest. He inhaled slowly, deeply, letting the night air flood into his lungs. He exhaled, releasing tension, fear, and fatigue. The river seemed to rise and fall with him, the stars blinking in approval, but beneath the beauty, he felt an unease. The breath that knows had taught him control, yet he sensed that the world itself contained forces he did not yet understand. Pollution, disease, neglect, all had corrupted the natural rhythm of human breath. If people could not relearn how to breathe, if the world itself faltered, could even the lessons of the cave endure? His mind raced with possibilities, questions, and a deep, primal fear. What if the knowledge he carried was not enough? What if true mastery required more than focus, more than discipline, more than intention? James knew he could not stay on the mountains or by the rivers forever. The lessons were meant to be shared, tested, and lived. But the challenge terrified him. Teaching breath was not like teaching math or history. It was intimate, visceral, and could awaken something raw and uncontrollable in the people who tried. He folded his journal closed, chest still alive with the rhythm he had carried from the cave, and felt the pull of the world beyond him. Somewhere, in the jungles, deserts, and cities, the same pulse awaited, hidden in the noise, waiting for someone to notice, to learn, to awaken it. And as he looked up at the sky, he sensed movement in the air above him, faint yet unmistakable. It was as if the breath that knows had left a trail for him to follow, a whisper carried on the wind, beckoning him toward the next stage of his journey. A chill ran through him. Somewhere out there, beyond rivers, mountains, and forests, lay the secret he had yet to discover. And he could feel it already. It would not be gentle. Chapter 7: The Hidden Temples. The journey took James across oceans, through dense forests and scorching deserts, and into cities where the air was thick with smoke and dust. Everywhere he went, he looked not just with his eyes, but with his lungs, feeling the invisible currents that carried stories, histories, and secrets. Breath was a map, and the world was a living archive. His first destination was a temple tucked into a cliffside, its stone steps worn smooth by countless feet. Monks moved silently through the corridors, their chests rising and falling in slow, measured rhythm. The air was different here, saturated with incense, minerals, and something he could not name. It clung to him, filled his lungs, and demanded attention. James followed the monks into a chamber where the ceiling was impossibly high, and the walls glimmered with gold leaf. They sat cross-legged, eyes closed, each inhalation and exhalation precise, deliberate. The rhythm was hypnotic, a shared pulse that connected every body in the room. He tried to match it. At first, his breath was shallow, chaotic, unworthy of the temple. But slowly, with patience, he found the cadence. Inhaling deeply, letting the air fill the lowest parts of his lungs. Exhaling fully, releasing tension he hadn't known he carried. He felt something awaken, a memory of breath that transcended time, a connection to all who had sat here before him. From the temple, he journeyed to the desert, following whispers of another sacred site. There, among sand and wind, he discovered a network of caves carved into cliffs by ancient people. Inside, the air was hot and dry, and the walls hummed with a vibration he could feel in his chest. Breath here was a survival tool, a form of energy management honed over generations. Inhaling fully meant life, exhaling poorly meant exhaustion, disorientation, even death. James spent hours, or was it days, learning from the desert dwellers. They taught him the power of restraint, the art of inhaling only what was needed, of exhaling deliberately to conserve energy. Each technique left him both exhilarated and terrified, aware that the smallest misstep could undo everything he had learned in the cave. In a dense jungle, he discovered another temple hidden under the canopy of towering trees. The air was humid, thick with the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves. Indigenous healers moved gracefully among the foliage, guiding their apprentices in breath rituals that opened the body to energy and spirit alike. James joined them, inhaling the rich, oxygen-heavy air, and felt his chest expand in ways he hadn't thought possible. It was in that jungle that he first realized the true magnitude of his journey. Breathing was not simply about air. It was about energy, presence, and connection. Every culture, every temple, every practice he encountered had discovered this truth in its own way, crafting techniques that harnessed the invisible power of life itself. But with every discovery came a warning. In each temple, in each hidden cave, James was reminded that breath could be dangerous. Shallow, careless, or forced breathing could injure, weaken, or even erase the subtle rhythms that sustained the body. Breath was a force that demanded respect, an ally, a weapon, a teacher, and a test. In a quiet moment, resting beside a jungle river, James realized that he was chasing more than knowledge. He was tracing the forgotten heartbeat of humanity, a network of temples, caves, and sacred spaces that all pointed to the same truth. Breath had been lost, hidden, misunderstood, but never destroyed. Yet as he exhaled into the humid air, he felt it, an undercurrent of unease. Somewhere, perhaps far away, someone or something was watching, tracking the flow of air and energy he now carried with him. The temples, the caves, the hidden sanctuaries, they were connected, and the power they held was not meant to be casually unearthed. James's chest rose and fell with the pulse of the jungle. Every breath now carried the weight of his discoveries, the lessons of the cave, the discipline of the desert, the precision of the temples. And somewhere beyond the canopy, beyond the rivers and mountains, he sensed the next chapter of his journey unfolding, an encounter that would challenge everything he had learned. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible sound, a sigh, a warning, a summons. It tugged at the base of his spine, a reminder that mastery of breath was never final, never safe, and always demanding. And James understood, with a mix of awe and dread, that the world of breath still held secrets far greater, and far more dangerous, than anything he had yet imagined. Chapter 8, The Lost Techniques. James arrived at a remote monastery high in misty mountains, a place so isolated it seemed to exist outside of time. The stone steps were slick with condensation, and the wind howled through the narrow corridors as if warning intruders to turn back. The monks who lived here moved with deliberate care, their faces serene yet unreadable, their breath synchronized with the rhythm of the mountain itself. He was greeted by an elderly monk whose eyes glimmered with a sharp intelligence. "You seek what has been lost," the monk said, voice low and gravelly, "but the techniques you will learn are not gentle. They demand attention, precision, and courage. Misuse them, and you will harm yourself, or worse." James nodded, his chest already tight with anticipation. He had felt the breath that knows, had moved with the rhythms of temples and jungles, but he understood instinctively that this place held something different, a lineage of knowledge so refined that only the most disciplined could survive it. The monk led him into a chamber lined with scrolls, diagrams etched into stone, and faded paintings depicting figures inhaling and exhaling in impossible ways. "These," the monk said, "are the lost techniques. Each one teaches control over the body, the mind, and the energy carried in your lungs. They are not tricks, they are keys." James studied the symbols carefully. Some described inhaling in fractions of a second, holding the air to a heartbeat, and releasing it in a controlled cascade. Others illustrated movements that aligned the spine, the diaphragm, and even the subtle muscles around the throat and ribcage. He realized these were not just breathing exercises, they were full-body practices, intertwining physics, biology, and something almost spiritual. The first technique was simple in appearance but fiendishly difficult in practice, a slow, deep nasal inhale filling the lowest portions of the lungs, followed by a precise pause, then a controlled exhale that released tension from every muscle. James tried it and felt his lungs scream in protest. Pain lanced through his ribs, but as he persisted, a warmth spread through his chest, radiating into his arms, his back, his legs. The air felt alive, flowing through him, teaching him what it had always known. Next came a method designed for endurance. The monk instructed James to inhale deeply, then oscillate the diaphragm in subtle waves, allowing the lungs to expand and contract like the bellows of an ancient forge. Each inhale brought clarity, each exhale released fear, doubt, and fatigue. James's lungs burned, sweat ran down his face, yet he continued, guided by the rhythmic pulse of the mountain air. The most challenging technique involved energy redirection. The monk gestured to a small pool of water at the center of the chamber. Some breaths are meant to heal, he said. Some are meant to energize. And some can pull life from you if you are careless. James placed his hand in the water, inhaled fully, and imagined the air circulating through his entire body, down to every nerve and bone, and then exhaled, releasing the energy into the pool. The water rippled as if alive, reflecting not just his form, but something deeper, a shadow of his own vitality. Hours turned into days. James practiced tirelessly, feeling the lost techniques awaken dormant pathways in his body. He realized that he had underestimated the depth of what he was learning. Breathing was not a simple act, it was a force, precise and dangerous, capable of reshaping the body, mind, and even perception itself. But the longer he trained, the more he sensed a subtle warning. Small mistakes caused dizziness, faintness, or sudden muscle cramps. Breath could heal, but it could also betray. And the more powerful the technique, the sharper the danger. He understood why these methods had been hidden, preserved only in remote monasteries and whispered in secret. They demanded respect, mastery, and vigilance. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and cast long shadows across the chamber, James paused. His lungs were alive with energy, his chest thrumming with power, but a faint unease tugged at him. The air around the monastery seemed thicker, heavier, as if holding a secret beyond even these techniques. He glanced at the monk, whose serene face betrayed nothing. There is more, the monk said softly. These methods are only the beginning. The final techniques are not written. They are remembered. They are felt. You must seek them where the air itself is alive with history. James's stomach tightened. The journey he had begun to understand, the cave, the temples, the jungles, the mountains, was far from over. The lost techniques had revealed the potential within him, but also the peril. There were forces beyond human comprehension, hidden in the currents of air and the rhythms of the breath, waiting for him to discover. And as he lay on the cold stone floor that night, inhaling deeply through his nose, he felt it, a faint vibration beneath the monastery, like the pulse of the planet itself. Somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the mountains, the wind carried a whisper. You have learned much, but the breath still remembers those who do not obey it. The next step will test more than your lungs. It will test your very life. James exhaled slowly, the warning sinking into his chest. The air around him shimmered faintly, alive with anticipation. He had touched power, felt it course through his veins, but he knew with a bone-deep certainty that the journey ahead would demand everything, and possibly more than he could give. Chapter 9. The edge of control. The air was thin and sharp, biting at James's throat as he climbed higher into the mountains. His lungs were alive with energy from the lost techniques, each inhale deliberate, each exhale precise. Yet even with everything he had learned, he felt the weight of the unknown pressing against him. The techniques had given him power, but now, they demanded endurance, focus, and courage beyond anything he had faced. The elder monk led him to a cliffside ledge, where the wind roared like a living creature, tossing mist and snow into the sky. Here, the monk said, voice barely audible over the gale, you will learn control. Not of the air alone, but of yourself. Few survive this test. James nodded, chest tightening with anticipation. He had faced the breath that knows, the hidden temples, and the lost techniques, but this was different. The mountain itself was a teacher, a trial, and a force that would push him beyond comfort or safety. He began with the first method, a slow, measured inhale through the nose, letting the cold, thin air descend deep into his lungs. Every muscle in his body tensed, every nerve alive, as he held the breath, counting in silence, feeling the world shrink to the rhythm of his chest. Exhaling, he released tension, letting the wind carry away doubt, fear, and hesitation. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, time lost all meaning. James moved from technique to technique, each more demanding than the last. The wind tore at his clothing, the cold bit at his skin, and yet his lungs burned with energy, his body alive in a way that both exhilarated and terrified him. He felt the delicate balance of life in each breath. Push too hard, and the muscles would cramp, the mind would panic, the body would fail. Hold back, and the energy would stagnate, wasted and meaningless. At one point, a sudden gust slammed into him, nearly knocking him off the ledge. Heart racing, he gritted his teeth and inhaled deeply, letting the air flow through him, steadying his balance, anchoring himself against the storm. Exhale, slow and deliberate, releasing fear, tension, and doubt. The wind responded, calming for a brief moment, as if acknowledging his mastery, but only temporarily. The next test was mental, to breathe while visualizing the flow of energy through every part of his body. Inhaling, he felt the pulse of life course from his lungs to his heart, from his heart to his arms and legs, from his limbs to the tips of his fingers and toes. Exhaling, he imagined the energy radiating outward, merging with the wind, the mountains, the earth beneath him. Each inhale demanded focus, each exhale demanded surrender, hours blurred into an unbroken rhythm of breath. James's lungs screamed, muscles shook, but he pressed on. He could feel the edge of control approaching, the point where mastery ended and chaos began. The mountain, the wind, the air itself seemed to lean in, testing him, demanding proof that he could wield the force without being consumed. Then, without warning, a sharp pain lanced through his chest. His body trembled. The energy he had cultivated surged uncontrollably, threatening to overwhelm him. Panic rose, a wild instinct screaming to flee, to gasp, to abandon control. But he remembered the cave, the temples, the lost techniques. Inhale, full. Exhale, complete. Center, focus, surrender. He inhaled with deliberate precision, filling his lungs, expanding his chest, feeling the air descend to the deepest parts of his body. He held, counting silently, letting the rhythm stabilize him. Exhaling, he released the excess energy, letting it flow into the wind, merging with the mountain, grounding himself in the cold stone beneath his feet. The storm seemed to pause, the wind swirling gently, almost in acknowledgement. James's chest rose and fell with the pulse of life, his body trembling but aligned, and a strange clarity settled over him. He realized he had touched the edge, the limit of human control, and survived, not by brute force, but by precision, patience, and respect for the power he carried. Yet as he caught his breath, another awareness crept in. The mountain, the wind, the thin air, they were alive, yes, but there were forces beyond even this, currents of energy and memory he could not yet perceive. The techniques had given him mastery over himself, but mastery of the world's breath was another matter entirely. He looked out over the jagged peaks, the endless valleys shrouded in mist. Somewhere beyond, rivers, forests, and hidden temples carried the pulse of life, waiting for him to follow. But he felt it too, a faint shadow in the air, a movement just beyond perception, suggesting that the journey ahead would demand more than he had yet imagined. James exhaled slowly, the wind lifting the mist around him. He had survived the edge of control, but he knew the mountain had not finished testing him. Every inhale, every exhale, every thought and intention would be scrutinized in the next chapter of his journey, and deep in the distant valleys, in the currents of air that stretched across continents, a faint vibration responded to him, a reminder that mastery was never final, and that the greatest lessons were still waiting to be discovered. Chapter 10, The Breath of the Ancients. James traveled next to a desert plateau, where the ruins of a long-lost civilization sprawled across the sand like the bones of some ancient creature. Towers of stone rose above the dunes, etched with symbols worn smooth by wind and time. The air was dry and hot, tasting faintly of dust and history. Even here, he could feel it, breath carried memory. The very wind seemed to hum with knowledge, waiting to be unlocked. He followed the faint etchings along a crumbling temple wall, noticing that many depicted figures inhaling and exhaling in positions that aligned their bodies to the sun, the stars, or the shifting shadows. The ancients had not merely breathed, they had mapped the flow of energy in the universe, channeling it through precise movement and rhythm. In a central chamber, a circle of stone benches surrounded a raised platform. On the platform lay carvings of serpents, spirals, and sunbursts, each corresponding to a different pattern of inhalation and exhalation. James knelt, studying them, tracing the lines with his fingers. He realized these were not just instructions, they were living diagrams, encoded with the knowledge of those who had mastered breath centuries ago. He began to practice. Inhaling slowly, letting the air descend to the very base of his lungs, he visualized the energy traveling along the paths etched in stone. Exhaling, he imagined it spiraling upward, merging with the patterns, the shapes, the symbols. The wind outside shifted, responding to his rhythm, lifting grains of sand in small swirls that mirrored the carvings before him. Hours passed, or perhaps days, time had no meaning in this sacred place. James felt his body transforming, muscles he hadn't known existed stretched, contracted, and aligned, his heart pulsed with a steady, powerful rhythm, and his mind opened in ways both exhilarating and terrifying. He realized the ancients had discovered something the modern world had forgotten. Breath was the bridge between body, mind, and the energy that flowed through the world itself, but with every inhale came challenge. The techniques demanded more than control, they demanded surrender. Hold too tightly, and the energy would explode in chaotic surges, leaving him dizzy, weak, or worse. Let go too much, and the force would slip, wasted, unchanneled. Each breath was a negotiation, a dialogue between himself and something far larger, far older. In the center of the chamber, James found a shallow basin filled with water. He placed his hands in it and practiced a method called the spiral breath, inhaling deeply, channeling energy downward, and exhaling with a slow, twisting motion. The water responded, rippling as if alive, mirroring the flow of air through his body. He realized he was not merely practicing a technique, he was awakening the memory of every life that had passed through this temple, every breath that had ever been taken here. The sun rose and fell outside, but James continued, lost in rhythm and focus. He could feel the energy of the earth beneath him, the weight of the sky above, the currents of the wind passing through the ruins. And somewhere deep within, he sensed the pulse of the ancients, their knowledge encoded not just in stone, but in the very air itself. Yet even as he mastered one pattern, another challenge emerged. The wind shifted violently, carrying with it a force he could not yet control. The chamber seemed to hum in disapproval, and James felt the faintest touch against his consciousness, as if the ancients themselves were watching, testing his readiness. He inhaled, deep and full, aligning his chest and spine. Exhaled, releasing tension, fear, and doubt. The air responded, swirling around him, guiding his body into positions he could barely hold. A sensation unlike any he had ever known coursed through his chest, light, electric, and infinite. Breath was no longer just life, it was force, energy, memory, and connection, all flowing at once. But as he exhaled, the shadows in the chamber seemed to shift. A whisper traveled through the air, faint but unmistakable. You have learned much, but the ancient's breath is not yours alone. Others seek it. And some will not wait for your understanding. James froze. The stillness of the ruins pressed down on him, heavy and foreboding. He realized that mastery of the breath of the ancients came not only with power and insight, but also with peril. Knowledge so old and so potent could attract forces far beyond his control. He clenched his fists, feeling the steady rhythm of his lungs, the pulse of the air, and the energy thrumming through his chest. Somewhere beyond the temple, beyond the dunes, a presence stirred, a shadow drawn to the power he now carried, and James knew, with a sudden clarity, that the next stage of his journey would demand not only skill and patience, but courage, cunning, and an unbreakable focus. The ancients had left a path, but the path was not safe, and he was no longer alone. Chapter 11. The shadow in the wind. The desert sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the ruins bathed in a dim, golden glow. James moved carefully across the sands, his lungs alive with the lessons of the breath of the ancients. Every step, every inhale and exhale, was precise. The air hummed around him, carrying the weight of history and the pulse of energy he now commanded, but he was not alone. In the distance, a faint shimmer of movement appeared, almost like a mirage in the heat of the desert night. At first, James thought it was a trick of the fading light, a dance of sand and shadow. Yet the pulse of the air told him otherwise. There was something there, watching, waiting, drawn by the energy he now carried. He inhaled deeply through his nose, letting the cool evening air fill his lungs. The movement in the distance grew sharper, more defined. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, cloaked, and moving with the silence of the wind itself. James's heart raced, but he centered himself, grounding every inhale and exhale. Breath was his ally, and he would need every ounce of control. The figure stopped a few paces away, the hood falling back to reveal a face worn with experience, eyes sharp and calculating. "You have learned much, boy," the stranger said, voice carrying over the sand. "But the breath you wield is dangerous. Others have sought it before you, and not all survived." James's chest tightened. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "I don't seek power to harm," he said, voice firm. "I seek to understand, to learn, to master what was almost lost." The stranger smiled faintly, a predator's smile. "Understanding is rare. Mastery is rarer. But even the wisest falter when the wind turns against them." James inhaled, sensing the air around him shift. The desert, the ruins, even the night sky seemed to respond. He could feel the currents of energy moving, pulling, and swirling with an intelligence of their own. Exhaling, he projected control, extending the rhythm of his lungs outward, anchoring himself to the pulse of the world. The figure lunged, moving faster than humanly possible, aiming to strike. James reacted instinctively, inhaling fully and letting the energy of his body surge through his chest and limbs. The strike was deflected by a subtle wave of air, almost invisible, but powerful enough to knock the assailant backward. Breath had become a shield, a force that responded to intention and mastery. The battle continued, silent yet intense. Each inhale and exhale carried energy, controlled yet explosive, bending the currents of wind around them. James felt the strain in his chest, muscles trembling under the force of exertion, but he remained centered, focused on the rhythm that had carried him from cave to temple to desert. Finally, the figure stopped, hovering just out of reach, chest heaving, eyes wide with a mixture of respect and fear. You have learned more than I expected," the stranger said. "But know this, others are coming. The knowledge you carry is not yours alone, and some will seek it with blood in their lungs and fire in their hearts." James exhaled, letting the tension drain. His chest rose and fell, steady and deliberate. The desert wind calmed, the pulse of energy settling into a quiet rhythm. He understood the truth of the stranger's words. Mastery of breath was not just about skill, it was about survival, vigilance, and the constant awareness that there were forces in the world, drawn to this power, that could undo him in a single misstep. As the figure vanished into the desert night, James felt the weight of the journey pressing on him. Every temple, every cave, every lost technique had brought him here, to the edge of understanding and danger. The world was alive with breath, and now he had become part of its rhythm, and its target. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint whisper, almost drowned in the rustle of sand. Do not falter. The next trial will demand more than lungs, more than skill, it will demand everything within you. James inhaled deeply, feeling the pulse of the desert, the ruins, and the energy in his chest. The shadow of the wind had passed for now, but the path ahead was clear. Mastery was only the beginning. The final step awaited, and it would test him as no cave, temple, or desert could. He exhaled slowly, bracing himself, and began walking toward the next challenge, toward the truth that had been hidden for centuries, waiting to see if he was ready. Chapter 12, The Breath of Life. James stepped into a valley bathed in golden light, the air warm, fragrant, and alive with motion. He felt it immediately, the pulse of the world beneath the sky, the rivers, the mountains, and the forests. Every inhale he drew was filled with a symphony of life, every exhale a conversation with the earth itself. The journey had brought him here, to a place where breath was not just survival, technique, or energy, it was the essence of existence. Ahead of him stood a circle of standing stones, each etched with symbols older than memory. The air between them shimmered faintly, like a veil of heat rising from the earth, and James sensed a rhythm, subtle yet immense, coursing through the circle. He realized with awe that this was the heart of the world's breath, the place where all the teachings, the lost techniques, the temples, the caves, and the deserts converged. He knelt on the warm earth and inhaled fully through his nose, letting the air descend into the deepest recesses of his lungs. The pulse of the stones synchronized with his heartbeat, then with his breath, then with the breath of the valley itself. Exhaling, he released not just tension or fear, but the doubts and limitations that had followed him throughout his journey. For the first time, he felt truly unbound. The wind moved around him in deliberate spirals, lifting dust and leaves, circling his body as if to guide him. He raised his arms, inhaling again, and this time, the energy he felt was different. It was not just power or presence, it was connection. Every inhale drew from the life of the planet, the air of the mountains, the oceans, the forests, and the cities. Every exhale returned it, transformed, to the world. He was no longer simply breathing, he was participating in the circulation of life itself. Memories from his journey surfaced with each breath, the cave where he had first felt the pulse of history in the air, the guardian who had tested him, the temples and lost techniques that had taught him discipline and endurance, and the shadows in the wind that had reminded him of danger and vigilance. Each memory was a thread, weaving into a tapestry of understanding that filled him with awe. The standing stones shimmered, responding to the rhythm of his lungs, and a voice, or perhaps the valley itself, spoke in the silence. You have learned to breathe, to master, to survive. But now you breathe as life breathes. You are part of the cycle, the flow, the pulse. Do not forget, breath is not yours. It is everything, and everything is breath. James closed his eyes, inhaling deeply once more, feeling the air fill every corner of his body. He sensed the energy of every living thing around him, animals in the forest, water moving in distant rivers, the subtle motion of the wind, and let it flow through him. His exhale carried all he had learned, all the care, attention, and mastery he had cultivated, out into the valley, into the world. And then he realized something profound. Breath was memory, history, energy, and presence, but it was also choice. Every inhale was an opportunity to create, every exhale an act of transformation. The journey had not ended with survival or skill, it had ended with understanding. James stood, chest rising and falling with the steady, deep rhythm of life itself. The valley around him seemed to shimmer, responding to the energy he carried. He could feel the pulse of mountains, forests, rivers, and wind all in harmony, flowing through him and out again. He understood that mastery was not about control, it was about presence, awareness, and alignment with the force that sustained all life. A final whisper, carried by the wind, wrapped around him. Remember this. Respect it. Live it. And never stop breathing. James exhaled slowly, the words sinking into his chest. The journey had changed him, reshaped him, and opened his awareness to a truth that transcended fear, doubt, and limitation. Breath was not just life, it was life itself, and he was finally a part of its eternal rhythm. He turned to the horizon, the valley stretching infinitely before him, the wind carrying 1,000 whispers of the past and 1,000 promises of the future. With a deep, full inhale, he stepped forward, carrying the pulse of the world in his chest, ready to live fully, consciously, and courageously. The wind shifted again, carrying the faintest echo of the guardian's voice, the temple's teachings, and the lost techniques, a reminder that life and breath were inseparable, and that the journey, though complete in one sense, was, in another, infinite. James inhaled once more, filling every corner of his lungs with possibility, and exhaled, releasing it into the world. And in that breath, he understood, life was alive, breathing through him, and he was alive, breathing through life. And that's The Journey Through Breath by James Nestor. But here's a question for you: which other book do you want us to bring to life next in full story form? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I read them all. And if you found value today, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Momentum Mind so you never miss a story that can change the way you think, breathe, and act. See you in the next chapter of your journey.